Hey everybody, welcome to TAM Lab number 59, Certificates in the Home Lab. And my name is Bill Hill and I'll be running this lab today. So I have about 16 years of experience in enterprise IT, doing engineering and architecture, support a bunch of customers in state government, manufacturing, software development, energy, utilities, childcare, and I got a bunch of certs. And you can see from that little blue dot on the map that I'm based in the lovely Pacific Northwest. And so, you know, certificates, right? They are maddening. They are a necessary evil. You know, I don't know if I'd rather deal with certificates or go to the dentist, but they're maddening. Now, they provide valuable service, right? I mean, like in theory, they do if they're implemented properly. But, you know, in our home labs and even in prod, we're accustomed to seeing these errors, right? What do? Well, we see it, we hit advanced, you know, and then we accept the risk and continue. And then we have this madness of like, is it a DIR? Is it a base 64, PKCS, cert, P7B, PFI? It's just nuts, right? There's not one standard. They each do something slightly different for their own reasons. It's just nuts. And then, you know, do I need the root cert, right? Do I have all of the intermediaries? And where do I even find those? And what order they go in, right? Like, as valuable as certs are, they feel kind of broken, right? And so we end up kind of adjusting how we think about things. Is it really valuable to go set up a CA and get a proper cert in there and spend the time on it? So, you know, there's a difference between a home lab and a business, right? We as home labbers can not care about certs, and we're only accountable to ourselves, right? Businesses have money for things like a Windows Server license and CALs. And so what are the options out there, right? So that's what this lab is about. I'm gonna touch on 3, and I'll walk you through the setup, and we'll issue some certs and then see what happens, right? And, you know, considerations while we're going through this lab, think about what the cost is of actually implementing the CA, right? And getting those certs, how easy it is to, you know, to run, and does it actually do what we want to do? And that kind of leads back to a previous session where we talked about our home labs and identifying like, what do we really need to do with this lab? What are we trying to accomplish here? So keep in mind, does this really do what you want to do? All right. So in this lab, I'm going to be running it on my my home lab based on vSphere 7, and we have 3 VMs that we're going to be leveraging here. So we have a web server running nginx, and then we have our 3 CAs. We have our CA01, which is maybe not as widely known, EJBCA, and then we have our CA02, which is based on OpenSSL, and then lab CA03, which is Active Directory Certificate Services. And so this is the last slide, so let's head over to lab. All right, so here we have an SSH session. I'll get rid of that, there we go. Open to our web server, and again, that's running nginx. And I'm gonna swing over the first one. We're actually gonna start with the OpenSSL CA. And so the logic here is let's move from maybe a little more simpler environment up to a more complex, which would be that EJBCA. So starting here on our lab CA02, right? The goal here is we want to generate, we have some, and I've saved some time here. I've generated some CSRs, certificate signing requests on the web server already, right? And so what we want to do is set up the CA here on CA02, and then start generating some certs. So the first thing I'm going to do here is create a key, and we're going to leverage this key to sign our certs, right? So, you know, here's a passphrase. We're going to do it twice. So when we leverage this key later on to sign the certs, we also need to provide the credentials, right? So a little extra security here. Next thing we're going to do is create our root cert. Right, so again, OpenSSL, we're going to, you can see we're going to leverage the key that we just created, right? So if I highlight that here, right? And it's going to be valid for 1,825 days, and it's going to spit out that root cert under etc SSL Certs. So again, I'm leveraging that key I just created, so it's going to want the password. And there we go. So it, oh, unable to load private key. Let's try that again. Maybe I just mistyped it. There we go. All right, I'm going to make this bigger just because it takes up more better space here. So in this instance, let's just go ahead and fill this out. And I'm going to do lab CA02. I know that's not a state, and that's totally fine. Oops, lab CA02, excuse me. There we go. And our city is also from lab CA02. And our org is also from lab CA02. We're in IT, and this is lab CA02. Some garbage. Okay, so it's pretty cool. So if we look at the command I run, I should be able to go to etc SSL Certs, and we can find that root cert in there. And after all of these, root certs that are up here, you can see here is the one we just created, which is great. So now the next thing we know we need to do is we need to get this root cert onto my machine, right? So that my machine trusts that anything it signs is valid, right? So I'm just going to go ahead and grab this cert itself. Oops. I'm going to dump it here. And this is the lab CA02 root cert. Okay, so we got that, but now we actually need to do something with it. Oops, and then I need to get rid of these old ones. There we go. Okay. So by opening this up, at least on the Windows side, right, I can look through here and I can see that it was issued to itself by itself. And if I look at the certification path, I see it's not trusted, right? And so there's a big X there. So I'm going to go ahead and install this cert, and I'm going to place it. It's hit or miss, at least in my experience, whether or not this automatically select is going to actually work. So I like to place the certificate, and I'm going to pick the trusted root certificate authorities. And now I'm going to get a warning. Hey, we can't validate that this is actually, a trusted cert. Do you really want to trust this? Yes, I do. And there we go. So now if I open this cert again, what I'm expecting to see is it's changed a little bit. We can still see it was issued to itself by itself, but now we're seeing the certificate is okay, right? So that's a great change. So now any cert that we generate from the CA02 that leverages, that key in this process is going to be, trusted, which is great. So I'll go ahead and close that stuff out of here. The next step here is to take that CSR, right? That certificate signing request that's coming from the web server. And we need to actually turn it into a cert, an SSL cert that we can use, right? So let me grab that. So this is the CSR that I generated earlier, right? And so I'm going to go ahead and CSR. There we go. So I'm just going to go ahead and dump that right in here. All right. So now that we have access, that the CA has access to the CSR, let's go ahead and actually just generate the cert. Give me 1 second here. We got this big command to run this, right? So again, with OpenSSL, right, we're specifying that we want to, take the CSR as our input, and we're going to leverage the CA's root cert, the key, create a serial, right? And it's going to spit out a file, right? Web server from labcao2.cert. It's going to be around for 1,000 days. Right, so now here we can see, some of the details of what's going to happen here, and it's asking for the private key password. That's it. Right, now we have a cert that we can use, right? Now, earlier I was joking about how much, how much of a pain it is. Like, do I need the root cert? Do I need the intermediate cert? What order do they go in, right? And so that's definitely the case here. We need to, for the nginx environment, we need a bundle of certs, if you will, that includes both the cert itself and the root cert. So what I'm going to do here is just real quickly kind of throw those together in a bundle. So I'm going to cat this one out. And I'm also going to include, let's see, SSL, oops. Certs, there we go. Cert PEM. Yep, that'll do it. And we'll call it web server. What did I mess up here? Oh, whoops. I forgot the redirect. Apologize. There we go. Okay. So I guess this is a good thing. So on this screen, because of the error that I made, by leveraging cat, I was going to spit out the contents of the certificate itself and then the root cert. So we can see here the certificate itself is at the top. The root cert here is at the bottom. And now if I actually spit out the entire bundle here, you'll see it has the same contents, right? And that's what we want to see. Now, real quick, before I keep going, anybody here on the lab leveraging OpenSSL for, kind of any certs within their lab? No? Either you muted or nobody is. Anybody feel like they want to share why they are or aren't using it?
I'll go.
Yeah, please do.
I started to use OpenSSL, and then for reasons I never got done with it. And then as time went on, I looked at the situation and I said, do I really need a certificate at all? And the quote unquote difficulty of doing it was disincentive enough to not bother.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
Out of curiosity, why are you putting an expiration interval that is not measured in millennia on your certificate?
That's exactly it. Because what's the likelihood that that cert's going to be around more than a year? Like I wreck my lab so much that, I want it to be longer than a year, but I don't, I guess I could put like 1,000,000 days.
I guess my thought is I rebuild my lab frequently, but a certificate seems like it could be a more durable artifact. It's not like I rename my domain every year. I keep the same domain name. So
that's fair.
I don't have to sit there and recreate the certs every time. Then, that's one less thing I got to do.
That's a good point. Anybody else have any thoughts on something like that? And that's totally cool. So while we were chatting, I went ahead and I just copied the contents of that bundle over to the web server. So now the web server itself has a file that we can refer to from nginx. So at this point, nginx, excuse me. So to set up nginx for this, I created a snippet, right, which is just kind of a little code chunk you can include. and I called it cert.conf just to make things a little easier. And so you can see right now in nginx, I have a self-signed cert in there, but that's not what I want, right? So now that we have this cert in there, I'm going to go ahead and put it in there. So CA02. So there's my bundle cert. Whoops. It has everything I need. And then, you know, each one of the, in this environment, each CSR was created with its own key. So I'm going to do this one as well for lab CA02. And there we go. So now with nginx, I'm pointing it at the key that we used for the environment, and then also the bundle of certs. So let's so I'm going to test the config, make sure it looks good. And let's see, what did I mess up here? So it's saying it can't find web server from lab. Okay.
I think you misspelled from.
Did I? Oh, I did here.
Lab or FroLab.
FroLab. Well, thank you for catching that. We'll just fix it here.
I was wondering if that was going to cascade into your copy and paste later on.
I love it. That's what this is all about. Let's see what breaks and fix it. All right. So if I run my nginx there, hey, look, because I can't type, apparently, we found an error. And now we got it fixed, which is good. So I'll go ahead and restart nginx. Okay. So because I never use Edge, I'm going to go ahead and use it here since nothing should be cached. So, okay, pretty generic. I'm going to go ahead and click this. And now we can see that it's being served by lab CA02, right? That's the cert. And you can see my obnoxious location, right? For lab CA02, right? That's why I pasted it all over the place, because I want to, you know, make sure it's obvious here. So at this point, right, the first example with OpenSSL, we created a mini CA, if you will, right? Created a key that we can sign requests with and the root cert. Imported that into my machine, took the CSR and actually generated a cert from it using that OpenSSL little mini CA, if you will, threw it into nginx, and it seems to be working. So any thoughts, any questions before I move on to the next one?
If you have to rebuild your lab, can you export the certificate from here and then use it again?
Yes, I could. And when you do, a number of activities like, on the Windows side, you can mark certificates as exportable as well to make it easier. So I could do it from the Windows side. I could also just back these things up. And since, it's a pretty simple file system on the Linux side, it'd be pretty academic just to do an rsync periodically and make sure that's somewhere else so I can rec, or, when I eventually have a power outage or something and things get messed up, I could at least have it somewhere.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So with that, OpenSSL, kind of the simpler, when we think about what are our considerations, right? Cost, it's the cost of whatever it takes to run a VM in your environment, right? It's a pretty small VM. Doesn't take very many resources. You can do even as low as maybe a CPU and a gig of RAM, and that might even be way too much. So it's pretty low on the cost side. Administration, there's notably a learning curve, right? Understanding what the different commands do, right? And the different options and how to troubleshoot it, right? Why would you use, let me bring this over here, down here at the bottom, request X509, no des, right? Like, this is one of the hurdles that people have, is it's a bit on the intimidating side, right? Is it easy to do? Well, once you kind of get in a groove, you can figure it out. I'm no expert by any means on OpenSSL, but this kind of leads to my next, consideration here is, does it do what you want to do? For me in my lab, I just want to spit out some certs. Is it kind of a pain? A little bit, but as long as I know I need to put my CSR here and I need to run this command to create my cert and then create a bundle, I think it's pretty doable. All right, so we have a chat real quick. Let me check that out. Oh, hey, yes, we absolutely can, Matt. So from here, I'm going to go ahead and get out of CA02, and we're going to go to CA03. So a lot of people probably feel more comfortable with this. We're going to set up a standalone CA using Active Directory certificate services. Now, real quick, show of voices or hands or something. How many people are leveraging Active Directory certificate services in their home lab? Yeah? Oh, we got a hand. I see a hand. I see another hand. This is perfect. We got a lot of hands popping up. Awesome. You know, arguably, this is this takes a lot of the grunt work out of certificates. So let me go ahead and start this process. So what I've done at this point is just stood up the server. I installed the role, but it's not configured. So we'll run through a quick and dirty configuration. Obviously, there could be more savvy that goes into this on, you know, how do you place stuff on the right hard drives, right? What services are you enabling? Things of that nature. We're just going to focus on the most basic setup here. So I'm just going to set up the certificate authority. And wait for this little blue bar to finish scrolling. All right, so we got that going. Because this is not domain joined, it's going to be a standalone CA. There's a lot of additional functions you get by being on a domain joined machine, on a domain controller, for some automation there, but I'm not worrying about that right now. And if you've seen in the other home lab stuff I've done, I'm running a Samba 4 based domain anyway. So, you know, I haven't tried to break that with adding certificate services to it. From here, this is going to be the root CA, pretty straightforward. I'm going to create a new private key because I don't have one. I'm going to bump this up to SHA-256 and keep the key length here default. That should be fine. I'm keeping the common name. You could change it to something else. Obviously, this is pretty straightforward for, you know, what I'm trying to accomplish. I think this defaults you up to 5 years. That's fine. I could, maybe I can, well, I'll keep it at 5. I would hate to pick a number and break all this. Again, this is a really straightforward VM. There's only a single hard drive, right? So we're just going to keep this at the default database locations for the data and the logs. And review all of the work that's practically the defaults and set it up. So compared to the OpenSSL work, right, where we had to manually create the key and manually create the cert, which is not that bad. Let's be honest. This was also pretty straightforward and intuitive. And I don't want to configure anything else, so that's fine. So now here, if I go to the certificate authority, I can start generating certs already, which is really nice. So the first thing we want to do, as before, right? If I can't trust the root cert, then how can I trust the certs that it signs? So we're going to go ahead and grab that cert. So by right-clicking on the CA and going to properties, you can see here certificate 0 pops up. I'm going to go ahead and view that guy, right? And it should be okay because it's its own cert. I'm going to copy to file. Now, I wish it would say something like export or something else, because copy to file and under details doesn't seem very logical, but that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to copy this to a location here under documents. So cert. Okay, great. And then I'm going to do that again, and I'm just doing this out of convenience for later. I'm going to do the same thing, but export it as a base 64. And I'll actually show you later on how that's a little different and why, you know, why you might want one over the other. So I'm going to do the same thing, except this time I'm going to tack on base 64 at the end. Okay. So now I have that. I got to get, whoops. I got to get that cert over to my machine. So give me a second here. So same as before, I'm going to open the cert. And you can see that it's broken because I don't trust it, which is fine. And that's actually, again, intentional. So I'll go ahead and place this cert in the trusted root certificate authority again. And the same message, hey, we can't validate this cert is actually from the server. Are you sure you want to do this? Yeah, I do. All right, so now, again, opening that cert. This time we see it changed. Again, it issued to itself from itself, and we see this cert is okay. So now we trust it. All right. So let's actually make a cert here, issue a cert. So I'm going to go back to my web server. Whoops, excuse me. There we go. Okay. So here's my certificate request, my CSR. So I'll go ahead and copy that over to the Windows side. Now, luckily, this process doesn't really care about the extension, so it is a .txt text file, but that'll be fine. So I can come in, right-click on my CA again, go All Tasks, submit a new request. Right? So I'll specify this CSR. And sadly, it doesn't say, accepted, whatever else. We just, get a message that, well, we don't even get a message, I should say. We go to pending request and we can see it here. All right, well, that's cool. I'm going to go ahead and issue this cert. Again, no message, it just disappears, and now it shows up in issued certs. And so if I open it, of course, it says everything is fine because it's its own CA. But I'll do the same thing as before, where I copied a file. And I'll show you why I want to do a base 64 here. So this is web server CA03. All right, so when we talk about the different formats for the certs, by doing a base 64, it ends up making it readable. And so this is a base 64 file. This is one we just created. If I open up the previous root cert that's not base 64, it's a bunch of garbage, right? Like it's in a different format that's harder for us to manipulate and know what's going on. And I find that using the base 64 ends up having more flexibility. It's used more often, especially in Linux-based environments, right? So base 64 gives us the ability to, easier copy and paste to move the cert around, and is, a little more, again, widely used. So with that, I have my cert that got issued by my Active Directory CA. I'm going to copy that back over, and we're going to do the same thing we did before. So give me a second here to get my web server up. All right. There we go. All right, so we have that copied. We have that in there, which is great. And then because we need that root cert to create the bundle, that's why I exported this one earlier to save me a little time. So this is my root cert. All right, so all right, so now I have my root cert, I have the cert that was issued, and I need to create that bundle again. So assuming I can spell everything correctly this time, lab certs, lab CO3, there we go. All right. I have my bundle of the two certs together, so let's edit nginx again. by having hopefully a consistent naming convention. I can just go change that stuff. Test nginx. And restart it. And I'll bring up Edge again. And what we should see here, now we have a new cert, right? So now this is the one that was issued by CA03, which is our Active Directory certificate services, right? So on the back end, generating the cert is slightly different. Again, considering the three questions from a cost perspective, unless you can magically procure licenses, there is a cost to a Windows server license and the CALs that needs to be, under consideration. I know there's MSDN options and things like that out there, but there is a cost to this if you're going to run it right. From an administration perspective, my take is, aside from a little bit of learning curve on, what's the workflow, how do I start the process of issuing a cert, it's pretty darn straightforward, right? Which I guess is nice. And then, does it do what you want to do? I think from the most basic function for me, it does. But it does also, and I think many of us know this, there's a web interface for managing requests. You can have, auto renew and request, things like that. So it's much more capable out of the box. There's other bolt-ons for OpenSSL to do some of that stuff, if you really needed to. But I think this is much more mature from the, how many options can this provide you? And the support perspective too. It's a pretty broad ecosystem of people out there that know stuff about certificate services. So any thoughts, questions? Did I miss something?
Just a general question regarding OpenSSL. There's no a comprehensive man command, right, where you can explain all the options you were putting after it. What do you recommend? Where do you go to read about this certificate stuff?
So it's kind of interesting. There's a number of sites out there. I mean, OpenSSL is widely used by, a ton of solutions out there. Where I find, and this is kind of goofy, and I'm not a customer of theirs or anything. I find that DigitalOcean ends up having quite a bit of really solid documentation out there on how to do a lot of stuff. And so, in trying to figure out how do I make this work on, Ubuntu 18.04, I found that they would routinely pop up, and their guidance was solid. So I ended up finding myself not, naturally going there. That's just kind of what happens though in my searches for guidance. We're seeing here in chat, Mr. Tilkins is suggesting OpenSSL.org/docs, which I guess is a very logical place to go as well.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Hey, Bill, Wildcard Certs.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Wildcard Certs. I don't think I heard that discussed.
Oh, that's a good question. I'll be honest, I haven't actually created a wildcard cert yet in any of these. So I'm not sure. I mean, it feels like that's very feasible, but I'm just not sure how we would do that.
Well, I guess what the point I was making is ignoring instances where wildcard certs would not be compatible with a product for whatever reason, and I don't know which ones those might possibly be. If we're talking about what incentive do I have to create a certificate, I would say if I'm going to create a certificate, what incentive do I have to create a unique certificate for every single box?
Got it. I guess that's a good point. That's good food for thought, right? Like, what are you trying to accomplish? I know I had one customer ask, can I use a wildcard cert for, was it the solution certs on the vSphere side? Like, that's a bad idea.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I would recommend my customer to use a wildcard, but I'm saying for my internal home lab, I would imagine most home labbers would say, I'm doing this for the experience.
Yeah.
If that's the argument for doing it, then I think the argument against setting your expiration to a millennia or later is if you've only experienced it one time, eventually you're going to forget. So the benefit of saying I'm going to do it every year is to force myself to do it and remember it.
That's
but
fair.
I think the argument beyond that is a little bit hard to press. And so I'm going to do it once every year, sure, but do I need to do it 50 times a year? Probably not.
Although to that point, and it's kind of the good and the bad of a wildcard cert is by having standalone certs, you also have a record of like, oh, this cert applies to this host or this service. And by having a wildcard cert, unless you're keeping tabs on where you installed that thing.
That's true.
But that's, they all have their own pluses and minuses, right? Not to say that your thought was wrong. I mean, your thought's amazing.
Oh no, I'm just admiring the problem.
Yeah. It's kind of fun when we can do that, by the way. Anything else from anybody? Got my one more scenario to run through. It's kind of an interesting one.
Hey, Bill, I got one comment regarding the Microsoft Certificate Authority. So a couple of years ago, I presented at a VMUG, and it was all around setting up your vSphere PSC or Platform Services Controller, the Certificate Authority within that component, right? Setting that up as an intermediate CA to your Microsoft Certificate Authority, right?
Yeah.
CA. And it's a relatively straightforward process. It's not too hard, but then I had a customer reach out and they said, how do we do this? Do it with our Microsoft CA, but they're using a standalone CA. So it wasn't an enterprise CA, and it was substantially more difficult. I don't know if things have changed, but it's because the standalone CA didn't include the certificate template for an intermediary.
Oh, yeah, that makes
certificate
sense.
authority. It was much more difficult. Like I had to generate all that, and I was kind of guessing around, how do we generate this template for a subordinate CA? So anyway, just a comment. The enterprise CA will make things a little bit easier for you.
That's a good comment, and that goes back to administration and does this thing do what you want to do? I know in the past trying to understand a Microsoft Certificate Services CA, right? Like you need to be very careful in what you're searching for and how you're looking for help, because you might find that your guidance for your standalone CA is being impacted by functions that's not clearly called out to be an enterprise function. Right. So, you're looking for this cert template. You're like, where is this thing? I can't even find it. Right. So it's just equally as confusing. Okay, cool. So I'm going to run into the next one. This is probably the most fascinating one. And I've started trying to use this more in my lab. Because again, it's not that I'm anti-Microsoft, far from it. I'm trying to do stuff where I don't have to spend a lot of money and, obtain a Microsoft license, right, for a server and the CALs just to create certs. And so for some of the comments that we made earlier on OpenSSL, I agree with some of those, right? So let's see if there's something else out there that might be, zero cost, low cost, but provide some pretty interesting functionality. And so I'm not sure if anybody's heard of this one. It's called EJB CA. And let me show you what this thing looks like. There's an open source version and an enterprise version, and it's deployed as a container. Pretty cool. Different options you can pass it. In this instance, I decided because I want to care about persisting my storage beyond the life of a container. They have an option for an external database. So on this CA, I have Docker installed, not Kubernetes, just Docker. And I have MariaDB, right? And it's been configured with, credentials and whatnot to allow EJBCA to actually leverage it. So I'll go ahead and kick this off. And we're going to grab the Docker container here. And this is what I love seeing, right? Like, we know that containers are kind of big in the industry, and that's that tipping point of when more services and solutions are deployed by containers, right? And so like to see something like this that the vendor has packaged as a container is brilliant, right? So you can see it saw the table with the database and it was empty, so it's creating the contents in there, and it's going to go through and do a bunch of configurations to itself now to stand it up. So we don't have to create the key, right? We don't have to create the root cert. And it has a lot of neat security components on top of it that I was kind of happy to see. it felt novel, but it also felt pretty, I don't know, maybe forward thinking or mature on how they do this. So let's let this thing finish up. Shouldn't be much longer. Has anybody here heard of EJBCA? You can raise your hand or come off mute.
I've heard of it, but never played with it.
Okay.
But I like the idea that they're just packaging it as a container, right? And I feel like that's going to be a lot more common going forward from ISVs, right?
I was looking through the documentation to actually set this thing up, and like to do it, you know, the more traditional style of installing packages and everything else. I mean, it's, you know, it felt like a PSO kind of engagement. So to be able to just spit out a container, that's great.
Yeah.
So now what you can see here on the screen at the bottom is kind of, you know, where we start. So it created, you know, a fresh installation and created management CA. So, you know, whereas before we called it, you know, like Lab CA 03 or whatever else, this one happens to be called management CA. So we're being directed here to go to the CA and enroll. Whoops. We don't need that there. So let me get Chrome up. And that's on the wrong screen. There we go. Okay. So here again, looking. No surprise. It's got a cert issued to itself by itself, and we don't trust the cert. Right? Well, that one I might have an old cert in. That's fine. But again, we go advanced and hit proceed because that's what we're trained to do. And going back to the container. Geez. Where did that go? CA1, there we go. We log in with super admin as the user, and then this long string of a password. Oh. Okay, so now we have a couple of really interesting things here. One, I can go grab that certificate chain right now. So I'll go do that. And as before, I mean, this is, you know, rinse, wash, and repeat. We don't trust the cert. So let's go ahead and install it. Yep. Again, are you sure this is what you want to do? Yes, it is. Okay, great. So now we have that cert chain in there. And then I'm going to go ahead and grab a user profile. So this is going to be used to authenticate me to EJBCA as the super admin. So I'll change this one to that and enroll. And so you can see here, it gave me a cert. And by opening that up, hey, here's the import wizard, which is nice. Here's my cert. It wants the password. Oh. Grab that again. There we go. And so you can see here, you know, 6HX, it's fine. I can make it exportable if I wanted to. And again, I'm going to place this manually in my personal certificate store. And I got a message, the import was successful, which is great. Okay. So that's interesting, right? We got the certificate chain. Now I can authenticate. We're not quite, you know, done yet, but that's fine. So I'm going to kill Chrome. And this is so that it reloads some stuff out of your local certificate stores. Otherwise, without reloading Chrome, at least, we're going to get an error. So I'm going to go ahead and browse back here in Chrome. And by clicking the link, right, going back, you can see it's prompting me, hey, select a certificate to authenticate myself. So it's not just, you know, username or password, but I also need that certificate that I just enrolled. And if I click certificate information, it's validating that my management CA, which we accepted the root cert is good, and my super admin user cert is good. That's pretty cool. And so by specifying that cert, it lets me in, and I can do stuff like go to administration. And this is where, you know, you can walk around and start changing stuff. And just by looking through here, right, like there's a lot of different options here, creating profiles, approval, right? I mean, it's a home lab. We don't really need a lot of approval workflows. Even going into system configuration, right? You can start seeing, you can set up auto enrollment. It can work with Active Directory, right? You can use tokens. I mean, like, it's a pretty solid solution made available just by deploying a container, right? So this is really exciting. Now, if this is something that you want to do and you deploy the free version, there'll be a handful of things in here that you're going to be, you know, denied from doing because you're not paying for the enterprise version, which is fine. You know, that's up to you to figure out if you want to pay for it. But what I found is this has been just solid. So back to the process, you know, we have the root CA up. We trust the cert. Let's go ahead and actually request the cert with the CSR and finish this up, right? So by going to the web interface, they do have a command line, but by going to the web interface, right, I'm going to make a new request, and it's a profile, right, subtype of server. And I'm going to use one that I provide, right? So we generated the CSR way back when over here. Lab 01. There we go. So here's my CSR. Perfect. So now I'll go ahead and upload this, and you know, it parses the CSR and starts filling in the blanks, right? Which is nice. And as you go through, right, you know, anything with the star on the side is required. So generally speaking, it has everything that we need, which is really good. I'm going to come in here and just for fun, for this, there we go. That's there. Scrolling through. And last, we have our options here. Right, so what I'm going to do, just to kind of keep the process, you know, similar, is I'm just going to download the PEM. And you can see default, it's a 2-year validity. I didn't change any of that stuff. So I'll just download that PEM. And, oops, open in folder is what I meant, sorry. Oh, it went away, shoot. Give me a second to grab that. Downloads. There we go. We're back. Okay, so now we have the cert, and I can open that up. And it's a slightly different. It has some additional metadata at the top, which is, you know, fine. I don't really care. I'm going to go ahead and grab that cert itself. And we're going to follow the same process that we did before. So we'll go back to the web server. Oops. There we go. Hopefully I spelled everything right. That's gonna bite me. From lab CA01. Great. All right. So then we'll grab. Let's see here. Where did that go? There we go. The root cert bundle. Sorry, the root cert from this. So that's here. Edit with. Oh, that's right. I need to. Right, because it comes out as a DER, a dir. I'm going to copy this to a file and export this as base64. There we go. So now, right, this gives me the flexibility of actually being able to copy and paste this and, you know, manipulate it a little better. Okay, and then we'll create the bundle. Okay, we're almost there. Test nginx. It seems to think everything is good. which is nice. Okay, so we got that all done. Let's get Edge up one last time. All right, it's a good sign. And there we go, Lab CA 01, right? So that management CA, again, that's the default name that EJBCA creates for its CAs. So I didn't have a chance to change that, which is totally fine. But we got the right cert. And so that's it, right? So thinking about, again, a cost perspective, it's free, right? If you want to use the open source container version, you know, it's just the cost of running a VM in your environment. Administration, it's higher. You know, understanding the paradigm of running the container, external database, and then actually how to use the service itself, it's much higher, but it's, you know, capable and functional. And so does it do what I need it to do? For me, all I need it to do right now is spit out certs. So it absolutely does. It does give me the flexibility to do something else later if I want. But on the flip side, it's going to be harder for me to figure it out. Documentation is pretty all right. The community is nowhere near as strong as OpenSSL and a Microsoft-based CA. So it's, you know, something for me to consider there. So that's it, right? Like that's the three solutions that I have for running certs in a home lab. Any thoughts on the last one or the overall just, you know, need to use certs?
This has been awesome. I've been tinkering around and I haven't done it yet, but I have a free NAS in my home lab and I've been playing around with potentially making that a CA and issuing certs from there.
Now I'm assuming that's just putting a nice front on OpenSSL.
I don't know. I honestly, I just started researching it, but I mean, it's GUI based, right? So you just log into the GUI and you can create a new CA and then start issuing certs from there. So I don't know. I need to do more research, but another option.
Yeah, and you know, I think what's unfortunate about a lot of SSL stuff is, you know, you really have to get into the sausage factory, right? Like, how do you see how all this stuff is made? And the reality is we want just that, right? We want a GUI that we put a CSR in and it spits out a cert on the other end. It feels like a Microsoft CA is probably the closest we have right now to making it that easy. Not to say it's not complicated, but once it's up and running, it's pretty straightforward.
Did you mention Let's Encrypt?
I didn't mention Let's Encrypt because only that, you know, this is good for like a web server, and I only used a web server because it's quicker to do this in, let's say, you know, a vCenter environment and things like that, and having multiple vCenters or whatever I wanted to do. So Let's Encrypt works well for those. It doesn't always work well for some of the other solutions out there. I'm not sure how to make Let's Encrypt work with, let's say, a vCenter environment, right? Like, what are the steps we would have to do to issue the cert somewhere and then, you know, go extract it and give it to vCenter? I'm not too sure what that looks like.
My expectation is that it would work, but I mean, you'd have to own a publicly accessible internet domain, and they'd validate your email address, right? So I mean, it wouldn't be free, but it would be cheaper than Windows.
It could be, yeah. And, you know, they do that validation too, right? Like, put this record in your public DNS to make sure, you know, so, yeah, I know people love it. And I think it's probably really good. I just haven't found a use for it, at least for me.
Yeah.
Cool. So I guess with that, I'll go ahead and, you know, we'll call the recording done. And I appreciate everybody joining, and stick around, and we'll chat a little bit more too.
Awesome. Thanks, Bill.
Thank you, Bill. It was amazing.